Okay, we'll do our market update here. We'll do SPX, IWM, QQQ, and if we have time, we'll do the dollar as well. That always has big implications for everything. We'll start with SPX. So my last update, I mentioned how obviously the Fed meeting was going to be a big pivot point. We did get a rally. It was a lower high that was sold, and so on Friday, we actually made a slight lower low, day 25 of the daily cycle. So our top was day 14. So now it's a question of when do we get, our daily cycle low, which is probably going to, start a rally for a few days that's going to end in a lower high. And so it's possible Friday was that daily cycle low. We'll have to see. Well, the weekly chart will give us some more clues as well. But SPX did make a lower low on Friday. If we look at the weekly, that was only week 16. We get bottoms around the week 20 mark sometimes, especially when you've got this much downside. So, we could see a bounce, in another four. Next week will be week 17. We could easily see a bounce around July 18, which would be approximately a 20-week cycle. We'll have to see for the weekly cycle. And on the monthly cycle, I keep mentioning this. This is really important to note. The top was month 22 from this major low, March 2020, right? So if we're having a 3-year cycle that started with the big low in March 2020, we may have a case where the top was month 22, and you can do the math, right? That's easy math. If it's a 36-month cycle, tops on month 22, that's a 14-month decline. We're right now in month 27, and so month 36 would take us into next year, right? We'd still have quite a bit of downside. And important to note, even that would still be a right translated yearly 3-year cycle, right? Because we would spend 22 months going higher and only quote unquote 14 months going lower. But obviously that would be very painful, a grind lower. Obviously there would be rallies in the middle, but they would be lower highs. And so if we move on to QQQ, really the same story, so I won't go into too much detail. Important thing to know for QQQ, it did not make a lower low on Friday. The SPX made a marginally lower low. It did not make a lower low on Friday. That was also day 25. But for QQQ, that was actually week 13 of the weekly cycle. And so it puts you in a situation where by the time SPX gets to week 20, it'll only be week 18 for QQQ. So it's going to be interesting to see how those converge. And the same idea for QQQ on the longer time frame. We had our major low back in March, but in this case, the top came on month 20 as opposed to month 22 because it was November. And then if we move on to IWM, so day 25 on Friday. Friday did not make a lower low. So SPX made a lower low, but QQQ and IWM did not. Also important though, we finally filled the vaccine gap. So this is a gap going back to the Monday, November 9th. I still remember that was the day they announced we have a vaccine that's viable. The markets gapped up that morning, especially the travel stocks. And we had, big downside for, the stay-at-home stocks. And so a lot of stocks has still had a gap for that period, from that day that never got filled. IWM as an index had that gap. And again, this is going back to November 2020. So that gap has finally been filled. It just got filled here, right? So we finally filled that area of price action. Doesn't mean it's a major low or support or anything like that. But just one of those things where it was sort of a juicy thing. And it was also a weekly gap because it happened on a Monday. And again, same thing for IWM in terms of the longer term, where top on 120, just like QQQ. And in the case of IWM, we're on week 16, so just like SPX. But for IWM, the last weekly cycle was actually 31 weeks, so pretty long. So it'll be interesting just to see how this all balances out. And so we'll move on. And so long story short, we still have at least another 4 weeks of downside. I would say maybe there's a little bit of a bounce in between that because we get a daily cycle low that ends in a lower high. Now, if you look at the Dixie, so the dollar index, that's going to tell us a lot. So we'll look at the daily chart first. So we have a swing high as of day 12. That was June 15th. right? So that's below 104.66. We have a swing high. So we're like right there. We're at 104.65 because we've kind of tried to rally back, and you see we've pulled back. So Friday was day 14, so we'll open day 15 on Monday. And so it's a question of, is this going to be our daily cycle high, which would be relatively early? It did make a higher high, so that's important. But this could become a false breakout, right? If we can't get back above this and this stays a daily cycle high, and that's going to be your tell for something else. So if you go to the weekly chart, it looks like we had a very shallow, very, very shallow weekly cycle low on week 20. That was the week of May 30th. We rallied higher, right? We made a new high, right? We made a high at 105.788. Many people said we'd never get there. Many people were calling big resistance at 103, and then there was big resistance at 104, just kind of moving the goalposts. So we got almost to 106. Now, this could be a very big, very bearish false breakout, right? Imagine this, right? We get this shallow weekly cycle low in week 20. This is week 1. This is week 2. Imagine if this is the high for a new weekly cycle. So that's very bearish, because it means we could have a decline now for the next like 18 weeks, because dollar cycles tend to be in the 20-week range. So we're either very early in a new bullish cycle, or bullish weekly cycle, I should say, or we may just be topping out very early in a cycle that's just turning bearish. If it is, that's going to be really good for risk assets. Given where the direction that the S&P is going, this may end up being a fake breakout, which is to say, it looks like it's going to be a false breakout, but we continue higher. But we're going to have to see. The price action is going to tell us. And on the monthly level, this is the other thing to keep in mind. So the dollar is on its own 3-year cycle advance, right? So the dollar started its 3-year cycle advance last January 2021. And so this month is month 17. We've made a new high. And so if we're talking on a 36-month cycle, the dollar could have quite a bit to rally before it has a high, right? Like, even if it's going to be a bearish cycle, we could still rally for another 3, 4, even 5 months, and then finally roll over after a month like, 20, right? 21. And that could very, very well correlate with the downside for stocks. And so this is going to be something to continue to watch.